And we're live. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining in. I can see a couple of folks pouring in to another live LinkedIn live session wherein I invite an expert that I am personally impressed with and I would want to spend time with. But instead of being selfish and asking for their time just for myself, I asked them to come on this live so that all of you guys can also ask your questions. Today we have Brandy with us. She's been very kind to give us her half an hour. So please keep the questions coming in. She's a fractional CMO. I'll obviously get into the professional, like introduction. I have it written, but I'll wait for a few folks to join in and then do that. Till then, I'll keep on blabbering and telling you guys that this is a golden opportunity. If you're a founder, if you're in marketing, if you're growing your company, scaling your company, this is the place to be because we will be decoding, not me, not we, Brandy, of course. She will be decoding and telling us her secrets of how she looks at growth, GTM, marketing in companies which are growing. So thank you for joining in today. Thank you for showing interest. Introduction, Brandy, and then okay, why did the okay, can you guys hear me now? I think it was my internet. I'm so sorry, but that's what happens when there is tech involved. Okay. So yeah, we're good. Okay, great. I'm so sorry. Yeah, my video was glitching and I was feeling, oh, everyone else's video is glitching. So I was asking everyone, hey, is everyone's internet okay? What's happening? But it was my internet. So all sorted now. I'll get into the quick introduction. Thank you so much for taking out the time today, Brandy. She's a fractional CMO, a B2B growth strategist, 20 years of experience in helping founders and leadership teams navigate critical growth moments. And this is what we're going to be talking about today because the topic today is choosing the right GTM motion for your next stage of growth. So, all you founders and marketing leaders, GTM leaders, be ready for some great insights and tips that you can actually implement in your organizations. So she like from talking about positioning, demand generation, training, sales, marketing, and building marketing functions at scale. Brandy has done it all. Her recent work has driven 65% of new business revenue and doubled quarterly pipeline. Now that is something that should stay with you. 2x, like literally, like that's huge. I mean, like if you're 500K, I mean, I had a founder friend saying that he wants to go at 1 million. There you go, like literally doubling pipeline. So you have all your insights today. So glad to have you here, Brandy. Tell us a little bit about how did this happen? How did you come to become a fractional CMO? And how did this journey happen? So let's just talk us through that first.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, thank you for having me on and really excited to be here. And thanks to everyone that's joining us. So I actually have, my roots are in PR and journalism. I've got a master's degree in PR. I spent some time in sales in undergrad and then spent 5 years after undergrad in sales as well. And took my first role in marketing with no formal training. And most of the teams I've been on, I've been the first or second marketer. And so from startups to mid-market all the way to global enterprise, I've encountered lots of critical growth moments. And so I've been a part of teams where we really are building the engine, right? So starting with whatever first playbook we had and then reaching a moment where it just wasn't working the same. And so we had to pivot and make some changes and really building a marketing engine that can scale, create and maintain demand, tie marketing activity to pipeline. Along the way, I've had lots of amazing mentors in marketing and sales and PR. And so I spent most of my journey kind of progressively and all the way up to being a head of marketing for a global enterprise. And then last year decided to kind of bet on myself and take my expertise and try to learn and grow. And I've been a fractional marketer ever since.
Okay, wow. So here's a question for Brandy. Please keep your questions coming in, guys, in the comments. In case you want to stay anonymous, you can send me a DM. I'll take those up as well. But it's easier for us if the questions come in the comments. So, Brandy, before we get into the questions which are coming in, let's start by breaking down the topic for today. And the topic is choosing the right GTM motion for your next stage of growth. So let's just
Mhm.
talk about GTM motions. What do you think about that? Because I think the definition of a GTM motion itself is very, I
Mhm.
mean, it's very easy. It's like a simple word, but it's not. It means different things to
Yeah.
different people. So explain, what does a GTM motion mean for you, and what are the signs that it's time to change that, like you mentioned, that it's time to kind of
Mhm.
change the playbook. So how do you realize that? What are the signs?
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start. For me, GTM at its simplest is the people and processes that empower a company to generate revenue. And I think that definition, depending on who you ask, it could be more complicated, but at its root, that's really what it comes down to. And so I think a lot of times people will think about, oh, is it founder led versus product led, or is it partner led? And sometimes you go directly to channels, but really it's the primary motion that you have. And then there's always a couple that are supporting of that motion. And if you think about some of the signals, maybe that it's time to kind of rethink or adjust where you are. A lot of times, we love our founders, but sometimes they become a bottleneck, right? Because they're the ones that have had the big vision, that have taken the risk, that are really have a great idea. But if the founder is still required to close, the biggest and best deals, that may be a signal that some of their great institutional knowledge, their market intel, hasn't quite trickled down into the business, right? To other people, to processes, so that you can kind of repeat and scale. Sometimes that comes across also as like custom deals creep, right? So lots of deals have to be custom, they have to be bespoke, and we don't really have a repeatable motion with pricing or some standardization there. Another one I like to look for is what I call the lead treadmill. So you may have the sales team asking for more and more and more leads, and the volume is kind of the focus versus, is the pipeline actually moving? Are we closing? What's the velocity? Conversion decay. So I know we've had the funnel, the flywheel, all the different ways we've talked about how people get into the business and, move down their path. But you still have some value in looking at conversion points. Are people actually moving forward? Are they moving forward at the rate that we expect? And then also rising acquisition costs. So if we've had some early wins, we're investing some money into marketing, into other parts of the business, are we spending more money for the same pipeline, or do we not see it moving forward?
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So are these signals that you talked about quite a few, and let's just
Yeah.
break them down a little bit. You
Yeah.
talked about conversion rate, and then you talked about deal customizations, and not having a proper like way to do it, structured way to do it. So can you
Mhm.
put them in priority, or like is there? So there's a question also which says that what are the earliest signs that a company's GTM motion has stopped working before the revenue
Mhm.
numbers actually make it obvious? So I think that's the thing, that before the obvious
Yeah.
markers of deals not converting and revenue not happening, are there
Yeah.
some pre-signals to getting, like before making that mistake, before like paying for it? How do you understand that it's time to change?
Yeah, it's a great question because a lot of times it is, a quarter or quarters that get missed, and that's the trigger that people are like, hey, maybe something needs to change. But there are actually some signals, like we were talking about beforehand. I really think one of the ones, particularly for smaller organizations, is that founder bottleneck. And it's not necessarily intentional. It's just that, the business has momentum, but you can see there are starts of you can see the system starting to strain, and those are some of the indicators, right? Do we always have to get the founder involved in these conversations?
Yes.
Are we expecting to have a big bubble at the beginning, right at the top of our funnel? We're doing great with lead gen, but we just see that messy middle not converting. We don't see the right types of deals, the right people in the
Yes.
person in the the funnel, and then also adoption without monetization. So if you're a company that's got like a product led and you've got free trials, are people kind of adopting the trial, but you can't get them across, into a paid trial or expansion or more transactions? So those are some of the markers that you can look for before you see it maybe show up on that balance sheet.
It makes sense. On that note, there's a great question that's come in. At least I love this question, and I would need the answer to that. How can one, like maybe the founder, distinguish between a GTM motion that needs optimization and the one that
Mhm.
fundamentally needs to be changed?
Yeah, it's actually an exercise that I have done where you can take maybe the last like 10 wins that you've had and look at them individually, right? So who was the buyer? What did they buy? How did they find us? What was the trigger? And I like to look at it kind of at a micro level and a macro level, right? So at the micro level, look at each deal and see, where you can get some insights, and then look at them kind of in mass and look for patterns. And so you could see where maybe a particular motion you're doing is working or it's not working, or maybe you've had like an isolated situation and that motion isn't quite right.
Right. Makes sense. So
Mm-hmm.
basically, an individual data analysis across different parameters, across the funnel.
Mm-hmm.
Again, like just looking at
Mm-hmm.
all those things that you mentioned, like
Mm-hmm.
conversion rates and how quickly is the deal moving? Are the
Mm-hmm.
right ICP present in while having conversation? All those markers, but individually for all the different deals that you're going at and
Mm-hmm.
from different GTM motions. So let's take a
Mm-hmm.
step back at the different types of GTM motions, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is, of course, founder led, sales led, product led, partner led.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, outbound, in. I mean, there's just too many names, and I can go on and
Mm-hmm.
on. Every time I talk to a GTM professional, there's something new. There was a something I think which Adam Robinson came up with. He said he called it inbound led outbound, though I think it was just
Yeah.
all motions combined into one. Honestly, if you ask me. So, but yeah, there it is again, a fancy new name, and then like
Yeah.
the entire LinkedIn talking about it. So, what is
Mm-hmm.
your take on this piece, on GTM piece, and what should a company double down on? Is there some
Mm-hmm.
structure to, like, if you are this, then you should do this? Something that you've seen in your experience.
Yeah, I think most companies will have a primary motion, kind of made for their buyer, the way the buyer buys, the way that the actual product itself, is adopted. Does it need, a salesperson to help kind of pull them through and help to educate them? Is it fairly obvious what the value is? Is there like one champion? Are there several of them? So some of those things will dictate probably what your primary motion is, but there's always a layer to it, right? There's always a layered approach. So there may be a primary one and a couple that complement each other, and really that is based on things like your the product itself, the buyer themselves, the market that you're in. And some of them do tend to go together, right? So if you've got a product that is, you've got a single champion and they understand their pain point, they have the authority to make a decision, they're going to actually implement it and they can do it, you're probably looking more for something a bit more self-directed, like product-led. Maybe some inbound if you've got a level of education that you need to do, compared to there being a full buy-in committee with multiple perspectives. They've got different motivations, different pain points, and that's a little bit heavier. If there's implementation that's involved, right, you're going to need
Yes.
something that's a bit more sales-led so that somebody can be an expert as they're going through their journey, making their decision and implementing the product, but then also ensuring that they are getting the most value out of it as well.
Perfect. So I have a few questions, and as a follow-up to what you just said, can you take us through the actual process? Like, you're a fractional CMO, so of course,
Mm-hmm.
like, think about like meeting like first time with the founder, or maybe the sales head, because
Mm-hmm.
usually if they are working with a fractional, they have like a sales team, or maybe it's founder-led
Mm-hmm.
sales. What
Mm-hmm.
is it that how do you go about that whole process of what is the current status? Are they using the right
Mm-hmm.
GTM channels? What does your process look like? And can you give our audience today like a framework that they can go back and
Mm-hmm.
analyze, like sit with their marketing team, sit with their
Yeah.
teams, and see where they are at?
Yeah, and you nailed it. It's certainly a conversation. It's not a quiz, right? It's not like you're checking a bunch of boxes. It is sitting down with marketing, sales, your success teams, because it's a full life cycle and everyone's affected by it. And so I always start with it being a real data-led conversation. And even if you're a smaller organization, maybe don't have all the bells and whistles and dashboards, you still have some level of data. It's also a way for you to have this conversation with the same objective information, and you can build consensus from there versus kind of trading on opinions and vibes. Also understanding that the motions are meant to complement each other. It's a layered approach, and your primary one is great. It's not a single pick because you do have to have others that support it. And I always tell people, in terms of a framework, start with the moment, right? Don't start with should we be PLG, should we be founder led. Start with where you are, and that means looking at your revenue, like where's the revenue actually coming from. the customer who's buying, right? So you may have started out with a certain ICP that may have shifted or evolved over time. So looking again at those wins, the triggers, why are they buying? How are they finding us? What's the process like? So from that first touch all the way through implementation and customer success, what does this look like? Where do we have holes maybe? Where are we doing really, really well and maybe can double down? Also the economics around it as well, right? How much does it cost us to acquire a customer? At what point are we making the money back, right, on our spend? And how much does it cost for us to retain someone? And then I also like to have that conversation where everybody gets to chime in on what that next stage is like. So the person that asked the question about, hey, I'm at 5 million now, I want to get to 10 million. What does it really take for us to be at 10 million? What has to be true for us as an organization to get there? And I think the other thing I would add to that is a really close examination of your ICP. And for a lot of folks, your ICP is like a Word document that lives somewhere, or it's in a deck. And one of the things I've really enjoyed about my work is we're working with teams that treat it like it's a living, breathing entity and an integral part of their business, right? So what are the signals that we can take from sales, from CS, advisory boards, your CRM data that you can continuously kind of feed into understanding your ICP? Because then you get to mind the gap between who you think your buyer is and who actually signs contracts. And that buying cycle is going to widen, the ICP is going to sharpen, and that again kind of fills in the rest of the framework and has a big influence.
That's like what you said is so on point. Can you give us an example? Because I know my company's ICP is not a document. It's a Google sheet. So it has all these columns. It has rows and columns. And I think when some customer comes in, and I think we converted one customer, and my team was like, "Oh my God, that's the ICP we need to go after." And there's this whole list. Like, it doesn't work like that. And now I feel like we're targeting 2 to 3 ICPs. I don't know what's happening. So it's actually the outbound team has a different take on what the ICP should be, because for them, the reply on the email matters a lot. And for the inbound, oh, we're content driven, so like we just want a specific set of people, because then they fill the form, they're very serious, then they give us their email. So how do you solve for this problem? How to convert something which is actually a doc into a living, breathing, like entity, which you said is very true. How do you do that? Can you give us a real example of doing that, like based on the company that you worked with, and we can all then think about what we can do?
Yeah, sure. So I worked with a company that is a Series B company in the identity space. And they originally had me come on to help them build out their demand engine. And so the first layer of that was actually working on their marketing automation and CRM, getting them to talk to each other, getting some real data, getting good cross sections of the customers that we had, and also the prospects that we were going after, taking that top 500 list or whatever from sales, that top the whales and all of that, putting it in there. But we also were able to build an agent that would take some of the feedback from the CS team and run it against that, right? So we had lead scoring, but we put together based on some very pretty standard criteria, right? We're looking for these types of companies, these types of personas, firmographic, whatever. And then actually saying how many people in our database fit this? How many of them are actually wins? How many are still stuck in that messy middle? How many of them never got forward in their buyer journey? And then I think you can then go back to your spreadsheet, right? Or your Google Doc and say, hey, actually, we're doing the best in these particular industries because of these use cases. This is what they buy, and this is who's in the buying circle, right? And so the more you can have data integrated into that, and kind of refresh it and look at it on a regular basis, that's who's really buying, right? And that's how you can make your ICP live and make adjustments when you need to.
So we have 2 questions which have come in. One, and both of them are having that difficult conversation with the founders. So one question is about how do you have that difficult conversation with founders when they're married to an ICP, but the data is showing something else entirely? And there's another question on that. My founder feels that if a company is doing something, we should just like copy paste that. How do I tell them that that's a different company? So I think, okay, so that was a
These are great questions.
Yeah. So both of them like different questions, but I think they're
Mm-hmm.
about convincing the team overall that the
Mm-hmm.
data shows something else, and the other one
Mm-hmm.
is actually the leadership feeling, hey, this worked for them, and they are
Mm-hmm.
at the next stage of growth. It can
Mm-hmm.
work for us too. So that kind of thing. So what is your take on both of these questions?
Yeah, I'll take the founder question first. So I feel two ways about it. As a company that's growing and trying to be efficient and maximize, your output and your revenue, you really need to have as many of your resources, your time, pointed at the things that are going to give you a good return. And so
Mhm.
if there is, vibes and gut feeling about a particular industry or an ICP, but the data is showing us something different, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's wrong. It means maybe it's evolved, right? Because you may have had a product that started off serving this particular ICP very, very well. And as your product has evolved, as the market has shifted, actually there's a little bit more, juice for the squeeze over here. And so let me
Mhm.
show you the bridge, how we can put focus here, get a better return over here. Maybe do things with this particular ICP, but maybe it's a different prioritization. So I think that's a great, way to maybe bridge that gap with your founder. Just like you want your founder doing their highest quality work and spending their time there, you want all of your other resources and time doing the same thing. I think the question about the competitors is a really, really good one, because a lot of times you can see two companies that look like they're competitors on the surface, but when you like open up the hood, they have very different operations. And I think it's like HubSpot that says there's like the four fits, and that's the key to growth, like your market, your product, your channel, and your economic model. So you may on the surface look like these two companies and they have the same, but their four fits could be completely different. I'll give you a good example. So think about two companies that sell identity verification, for example, right?
Mhm.
That's a category that comes in lots of flavors. They both are doing onboarding. But if company A has a product that really serves the gaming industry, for example,
Mhm.
and then company B has a product that traditionally does better with like banks and credit unions, they look completely different under the hood,
Yes.
strictly based on who their buyer is, right? Where their buyers
Yes.
are, what numbers they need to hear in terms of proof points, how they implement the product, how they measure success. And so that's why you can't necessarily take somebody else's motions and like bolt them on, because it may actually not be the thing that is right for your company.
But how about like a bigger company in your domain? So like I'm a
Mhm.
CRM, and just giving a random example, I'm an agentic
Yeah.
CRM, and I'm like, hey, HubSpot made inbound, and they coined the word inbound, and they became this big company. How about we make another word and like create
Hmm.
new category and become that? So what because they are in a similar phase.
Hmm.
They've done it like 5 years back. Thoughts on that? How to like talk to a leadership person who wants you to replicate what happened 5 years back in a successful way and wants you to do the same.
No, it's real, because I've definitely been in those conversations. The first things first is, the market moves, evolves, sure, right? But I also think sometimes when companies are having that conversation, they're in a place where they're stuck, right? So a lot of times with a stalled company, they can't exactly say what makes them different. So there's an urge to say, oh, well, this worked for somebody else. Let's try it. And so it's a good conversation to say, hey, let's take a step back and test a couple things, because there's two things that really make you different: your methodology, right? The way that you
Mm.
do something or the way that you deliver it, and then also maybe who you're for. And if you're having a hard time deciding, what's distinct about either of those things, it's worth trying to reevaluate what really sets you apart, and then you can put your energy and your resources toward that. And it may be something your competitor's doing, but you're speaking about it differently, speaking to a different audience about it, or again, your methodology just may be different, more efficient, bigger, faster, stronger. And then that's really the message and what you go for, not necessarily trying to copy what they've done.
Wow. I mean, I love where this conversation is going, because I'm seeing the comments coming in from user. People are saying like that the cost of, so this is one person, Preston, saying the cost of acquiring your ICP is so vital, and thanking you. And of course, that's
Mm-hmm.
very true, because, and there's a very interesting question that's coming, because, and the person says that uh, building tech has become very agile, and you can ship out features faster. So you start building out for one ICP, but because you start acquiring like certain non-ICP folks, and they require certain features, and you go back, and then you kind of, because in a startup, when you're in a startup mode, you kind of build out
Mm-hmm.
certain features, and you feel, oh, they'll be useful for my ICP too, and then
Mm-hmm.
suddenly you're like switching your ICP. So like, Like, is the market driving that product change? So how do you solve for that problem? Because clearly you're able to sell into a market, and you'll be able to
Mm-hmm.
better sell into that market
Mm-hmm.
by building out 2 or 3 features, but you started out the
Mm-hmm.
product for a different ICP. Because obviously, when you say ICP, we try and go very niche, but there's certain overlaps that happen. What are your thoughts on
Mm-hmm.
it? Because that's very true. With now tech being built very fast, features
Mm-hmm.
being launched like super quickly, are
Mm-hmm.
we deciding the ICP, or are the ICP changing our product, or is it the sales team driving the ICP? What an amazing question. I am confused. Over to you, Brandy.
I think it's probably like all of that kind of happening at the same time, but I think you really have to stick to your North Star, right? Like what is my product? Who is it for? Who does it best serve? Now, I absolutely have talked to companies where they've said, hey, we started out going after these particular, markets or industries, and then they realize that it's transferable, right? The things that make them their product, the things that make them great, the use cases that they solve for are transferable. But at some level, there's always some kind of prioritization. So I've worked for a lot of companies in SaaS where there's like 8 or 10 industries that they can serve, right, to different degrees. But the focus is on these 2 or 3 because that's where the money is, right? We actually,
Hmm.
do well here. We have good proof points. Implementation works. We've got the SME expertise in house to speak to these folks. We're already in the, watering holes where they are, and there's proven, viable product. It can work over here. It can work over there. But usually, what you do is try to prioritize. If you try to be everything to everybody, that just kind of waters things down, and you can't focus. And so what I would do there is just say, hey, you can even put them in tiers. I've worked with customers to do that, right? Going back to the data, we get the best return here. We've got the happiest customers here. So this is kind of our tier 1 focus. Here's tier 2, where we're very opportunistic, right? If it comes along and we've got a good fit, we've got a good conversation, the founder knows somebody, the sales team is bringing relationships in, then we put, X amount of energy there. And then there's people who are truly like, hey, it could fit here. Maybe this is future state, right? Or it's just a smaller part of the pie.
Yes. So so what is your thought on, then, like, the final take on having more than one ICP? Or is it
Yeah.
still the same ICP? You can have more than one ICP.
I think
That's
you
still.
can have, you certainly can. I mean, I'll say, I have a primary ICP. Most of my experience is in B2B and SaaS. But at the end of the day, the thing that makes me unique is that I've had all of these great growth moments that I've helped, companies with. And so if you're a company that's not B2B SaaS, but you have a growth challenge and you need to get, your engine running, I can still help you, right? And a lot of that's transferable. There's certainly ones where it's not as good of a fit. But I think that having multiple ICPs, I mean, maybe a few, you don't need to have 12 or 15. Maybe like that's a bit of a stretch. But
Yeah.
as long as your core, point of differentiation, your methodology is transferable, then I think it makes sense. But I think you also have to do it in such a way that you're still protecting your economics. You are still taking care of your core ICP, like where the money is coming from, and kind of going back to some of those criteria we talked about before. If you're getting straying a little far, or having to like strain to make it fit, then maybe, concentrate elsewhere.
Makes sense. There's a question on SMB versus enterprise, because enterprises are a bigger deal
Mm-hmm.
size. So
Mm-hmm.
there's always this push to get them, but it's a longer sales cycle.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas SMB is more product led, enterprise sales led. What would you recommend in such a case for a company? I think it's a whole question on ROI. So that's what it boils down to. So it's come in my DM. So that's
Okay.
what, because it's somebody that I know. So can you just talk us through? It's a whole rant on ROI and
Yeah.
bigger deal size, enterprise and SMB. So I think SMB is what I understand is their primary ICP, but yet
Mm-hmm.
there is this push from the organization leadership to kind of also go after enterprise. So how do you structure in such a case?
Yeah. I think you you need to think about, again, kind of going back to some of those big factors around who your buyer really is, what the product, how much of it can sell itself, and then also thinking about time to value, right? How fast can someone feel that this works? And if it's a small business, and they can be the user of the product, they can see the results of it, the implementation is fairly straightforward, then you can think more along the lines of things like product led or inbound, right? Because it matches that motion. And if again you are getting pushed to think about more bigger enterprise customers, what's the delta between what you deliver well now and what you need to deliver to an enterprise level customer? Enterprise level
Yes.
customer with a bigger buying cycle, with longer buying cycles, with bigger circles, is going to need more expertise, more education. You need more runway. They need to have heard of you before, right? Before they're about to, sign a big deal or not selling widgets in the enterprise space. And so if you can bridge that gap between being primarily product led or kind of self-serve type of motion, then you can start to build toward enterprise, and also setting proper expectations about what implementation looks like and time to value looks like, because your solution may have to get in there and may have to cook for a little while before you start to see the ROI on acquiring that type of customer. And then also be willing to have hands-on help that you can invest in to lead somebody through that process. And so sometimes enterprise works because you are building toward that and you've got those pieces in place or the runway to do so. But maybe if you don't yet, right, you can still spend some time with smaller, SMB type customers until you get there, or you find a sweet spot and it's volume, right? So I think there's just, you kind of have to, Rubik's Cube it a little bit and understand what it involves investment wise before you make enterprise a target.
Yeah, I can't believe it's already time. Like we're at 9:30. I mean, like it's like the kind of what an amazing conversation. So many questions coming in, but I'll take one last one because I mean, even I wanted to know. So, from your experience, can you give us your favorite or like these are the GTM motions that work best when you start out like as a startup, then in like that growth stage, and you can take any industry, you can take B2B tech, B2B service, or whichever example, because you work with B2B, so hence you can take that example and just run through those stages. How, like, is it adding of new channels, letting go of a particular GTM motion, adding a new motion, or tweaking the existing motion? Can you take us through that story of an organization growing and then adding and subtracting GTM motions that you've personally seen?
Yeah, I think when you're first starting out, again, your founder kind of is like the market intelligence, and they're the ones having conversations. And so as you start to grow, how can you start to get their institutional knowledge distilled into other parts of the business? So whether that's processes or content or relationships, then you can start to build, and maybe you can develop a part of the product that is a little bit more self-serve, and so people can log in, they can adopt it, and you can get their feedback, and then start to build out some longer tail discussions with them or touch points. I always tell any company, start with your owned properties and optimize them to the best of your ability, right? Your website, your social media, the people, right? Invest in your people so that they can have high quality conversations, and then move on to things like earned and paid. I do think what's really moving a needle for a lot of customers and clients I work with right now are things like earned and authority, right? So like PR is back in a big, big way because LLMs love it, right? They love it. It's outside validation. There are, proof points. There's a specific point of view. There's original research a lot of times. And so backlinks. And so I've loved to see this renaissance of PR. People love curated experiences, right? So whether it's exclusive dinners or planning around trade shows, roundtables, customer advisory boards, obviously it depends on what you've got, capacity for, what your team can handle. But I think a lot of folks with all these digital touch points and all this AI everywhere love a human to human, interaction. And then, I've seen people also spend a lot of time in their actual demand infrastructure, right? So looking at their operations, looking at their tech stack. Do we have a waterfall? Do we have an SLA? Does everyone believe in the data, right? Do we have a process, and a workflow that makes sense and works for everybody? And I think that's one of the beautiful parts of go-to-market is that it's everybody with the right expectations and benefiting from the motions. And so I tend to tell people, like, pick one or two that fit where you are right now, and then move on or pivot or be willing to be agile as you get more learnings, because there's not necessarily a linear path for everyone, because your product is distinct and unique, your buyer is unique, and the way that your kind of four factors are configured should help you understand where to go. But I always tell people, start small, build a process around it, optimize. Give it some time to work, because if you do something as simple as, hey, we found a leak in our bucket in HubSpot, or these two things weren't connected, you're going to probably see some value really quickly around that. If you have to change your pricing, though, right, that is going to be a little bit longer that you need, right, to let it kind of marinate, get some feedback, and then decide where you need to make changes. So I think the biggest thing is staying data driven, having objectives, having clear expectations, roles and responsibilities being very, clear cut from the beginning, and being agile so that you can pivot and make moves as things, grow and expand.
Wow. I mean, I think, Brandy, this is one of those sessions wherein we've had questions coming in, comments, and equal parts appreciation coming in, because you're literally dropping bombs every two sentences that you say. You're dropping this big bomb of information. There's time to value that we talked about, cost to acquire ICP. I mean, like such nuggets, but like some things which are very obvious, but when you listen to those, you're like, ah, yeah, this is important, but you don't like really work on them. They sound very obvious, but then you're like, oh my god, such a simple thing, but then such a big impact. So thank you so much for taking out the time today. I mean, the audience loved it, I loved it, and I did not have to go to, like, I prepared a whole list of questions to ask. I did not have to even open that document. I mean, we had so many questions coming in and my DMs buzzing. And I feel that I probably have left a few questions, because, like, it was just the flow of the conversation. I was enjoying it so much. Thank you so much for taking out the time. But one last question we asked all of our guests: what's your favorite AI tech stack right now that you use to work with your companies that you're working with? And one advice for fractional CMOs. That was a question that had come to me, and I forgot to take that. So one last question: favorite AI tech stack, and of course, advice to fractional CMOs out there.
Well, I was going to say thank you again for having me, and thanks for everyone that joined and for your awesome questions. If you want to connect with me, please do. I love to talk shop, so please find me on LinkedIn. For the tech stack, I love this question, and I will say that my stack is actually smaller than you probably expect. I'm very old school. I'm still very much into having the one single source of truth, the CRM, and then everything kind of needs to earn its place around the CRM and feed into it. I hate when there's like 10 different tools like doing their own thing in a corner. And every piece earning its place means, is it actually moving the motion forward? Are we getting progress out of it? And so one of my favorite things to stack on the top is an agent that does enrichment. And it enriches the data directly into the CRM, of course, as a person, kind of monitoring and setting parameters. But I love what happens after that, right? So it can help you to read close won accounts, look at lookalikes, helps, again, sharpen your ICP, because it's putting all of that data together and providing insights, and then actually writing messages and pushing out sequences. So again, like one connected flow instead of jumping between a bunch of tools. I love call intelligence. I'm a big fan of listening to sales calls, getting the actual voice of the customer, feedback from CS team. I love intent and account signals. So, an ABM type part of the tech, but it's not the signal actually that's important, is what you do after, right? So one of my favorite plays is taking alerts and signals from an ABM type solution and giving it to customer success, right? It's because they're having those conversations. They need to be helping to mine those accounts for cross-sell, upsell, expansion, and hearing and looking at what actually people are searching for gives them a huge leg up. And then, you think about an AI visibility tracker. A lot of CRMs and automation have it built in to some degree, but there are other tools that you can plug in that can help you see if you're showing up in AI answers, what's being said about you, is it useful, helpful, and then you can start to make decisions around it. I tend to shy away from things that are like AI powered, because it's like another login, another dashboard, it's not actually helping me to make decisions. And I love a drafting partner, like something that can help me move from just having a blank page and give me a first draft, even if it's not great, because then I'm spending my time actually curating and personalizing something versus trying to synthesize the data and start from zero.
Wow, man, like you have this whole army, like you're a fractional CMO, but you have a whole team, whole army working with you on this. And so one last question, and then we'll end the live. Is
Yeah.
your advice to fractional CMOs out there? How do they build their business? How should they look at it overall?
Yeah, I think advice that I got from someone near and dear to me was the power of community and investing in your community, finding ways to be helpful. The rising tide and floating all the boats. I think one of the best things about taking fractional, being independent, is that people are so generous with their time, their expertise, and open and will share with you. And so do the same, right? So build your community, stay in touch with people, and most of what I've been able to accomplish, and I've got a long way to go and lots to learn, has been because I've had a great community and people who are willing to speak your name in a room that you're not in. So you should also do the same for others.
Another like very simple insight, like, but really impactful, like the community piece. This is very important. Keep
Mm-hmm.
giving and you'll automatically get. I really believe in that thing. You don't
Mm-hmm.
have to necessarily get from someone when you give. Just give. Get, well, you'll get it from somewhere else. Like that's how the universe balances it out,
Yes.
honestly, at the end of the day. You don't have to
Absolutely.
necessarily get it from the channel that you're giving. You can give it to this channel and you can get from another one. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's amazing. Thank you so much, Brandy, for taking out the time today. Thank you everyone who joined in, for your amazing questions, your comments. We like oh my god, we did it for, like, we were planning to do this for 30 minutes. We did it for 40, like 10 minutes extra. So thank you
Wow.
so much, Brandy, for being so patient and giving us all these answers. This is super amazing. I think we'll host you again because you have so much of information, and I would love to have you back again. The kind of like conversation we had today, it was insane. It was so amazing. Thank you so
Cool.
much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you,
I'd love to
everyone.
be back. And thanks to everyone that joined.